For a long time, the Mission Impossible franchise has stood as the benchmark for action movies, because these movies have managed to balance explosive set pieces with intelligent storytelling. Since 1996, audiences have followed Ethan Hunt and his friends through conspiracies, betrayals, and world-ending threats, all moulded together with a degree of polish and pacing that has been rare in blockbuster filmmaking. So when Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning was advertised as the franchise's conclusion, expectations were obviously sky high. So did the film actually manage to meet those expectations?
Not really. Maybe.
While Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning wasn't a bad movie by any means, it does fall short of the high bar previously set. The final entry to this franchise feels held back, mainly because particularly in the first half of the movie, there was just sheer tons of exposition. To better understand the impact of this storytelling choice, it's helpful to compare The Final Reckoning with its predecessors and examine how filmmakers can balance exposition with the action that defined this franchise. Firstly, every movie needs exposition. It's how the audience learns the who, what, why, when, and how of a story. When exposition is done well, it's usually invisible. It slips into the narrative naturally, hidden behind character actions, visuals, and clever dialogue. Exposition is like using salt in cooking. It's necessary in moderation, but it's absolutely disastrous if it's overused. And sadly, The Final Reckoning seasoned itself to death, burying what could have been a brilliant finale under mountains of explanatory dialogue. You see, the film's villain is the Entity, a rogue artificial intelligence system. It's quite a fascinating idea, but instead of allowing the AI's danger to unfold naturally, the film chooses to repeatedly halt its momentum, giving characters extensive jargon-loaded speeches explaining exactly how dangerous the Entity is. I imagine watching Jaws and every 10 minutes David Attenborough pauses the movie to constantly remind you how dangerous sharks are.
Not a great plan.
Compare this approach with Mission Impossible: Fallout. In that film, the nuclear threat is introduced in quite a smart way. It's introduced through a fake newscast. It's a quick and tense scene that immediately conveys the urgency and stakes. The viewers are able to feel the threat instantly, and there's no long, endless conversations required. One of the hallmarks of the best Mission Impossible films, particularly standouts like Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout, is their masterful pacing. These films move you along, keeping the tensions high and audiences engaged. Scenes flow naturally from action to suspense and back again, with exposition subtly integrated into the story. Unfortunately, The Final Reckoning repeatedly fails this test. To truly appreciate how effectively pacing and subtle exposition can blend into powerful character moments, let's look at the Burj Khalifa sequence in Ghost Protocol. During this scene, Ethan Hunt seriously considers handing over actual nuclear launch codes to terrorists as part of a desperate bluff. At this point, Jeremy Renner's Agent Brandt confronts a moral dilemma, one that's conveyed brilliantly through action and tension rather than extended dialogue. Brandt's instincts kick in, and he threatens to drop the suitcase containing the nuclear launch codes out of the window, rather than allowing them to fall into the hands of the terrorist. This action speaks volumes about Agent Brandt's moral compass, and it reveals his integrity and depth of his character without stopping for a lengthy explanation. It's exposition in motion, a prime example of storytelling at its most effective. If the filmmakers of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning were to write this scene, we'd probably have Agent Brandt give a lengthy monologue about morality, nuclear ethics, and a lecture about why terrorism is bad. And the thing is, great action cinema thrives on precisely these kinds of seamless character-driven moments. Moments where moral conflicts and tough decisions naturally fuel the action. By failing to uphold these principles, The Final Reckoning reveals precisely why pacing isn't merely important in action films, it's absolutely essential. When exposition is done well, it serves character development. It also enhances the audience's understanding of the character's actions and motivations. In previous films like Rogue Nation, we learnt about Elsa not from long-winded backstories, but by observing her decisions and ambiguous loyalties. Her complexities were exciting precisely because they weren't just told to us, but because they were shown. And that brings me to Hayley Atwell's Grace. In The Final Reckoning, unfortunately, her character's potential was completely wasted. Hayley Atwell was a truly wonderful inclusion to the Mission Impossible franchise. Truly amazing. Her character, Grace, was introduced as a morally complex character, and her character, Grace, had all the potential to echo the nuanced ambiguity of Elsa Faust from the earlier films. But rather than giving her space to reveal her inner struggles through actions, the movie insists on repeatedly clarifying her inner conflicts out loud. As a result, Grace often feels like a character constructed just to deliver exposition, rather than someone organically evolving through experiences. In this movie, characters are often found explaining themselves directly, openly stating their motivations like they're in a therapy session rather than an action movie. The villain, Gabrielle, has mysterious ties to Ethan Hunt's past, and he spends so much time telling everyone about his motivations. He basically just feels like a frustrated host of a podcast. Compare that to how Mission Impossible Rogue Nation handled the antagonist in that movie. Solomon Lane didn't explain his evil intentions through excessive monologues. His silence and calculated dialogue added layers of menace. His character became more intimidating precisely because he didn't over-explain himself. It's probably worth clarifying at this point that it's not necessarily a bad movie. It remains a competent, often spectacular cinematic experience that is clearly crafted with great care, significant resources, and incredible commitment from everyone involved. However, the reality is that particularly during its first half, the film struggles noticeably under the weight of its own narrative complexity. While the clarity in storytelling is admirable and necessary, the approach introduced significant narrative bloat into an already formidable runtime of 2 hours and 50 minutes. That's a risky length for even the most finely tuned of films. When a film approaches nearly 3 hours, each scene and each line of dialogue needs to justify itself. Yet just when patience is beginning to wear thin, the film somewhat redeems itself in the second half. It transitions into a stunning display of action filmmaking, delivering stunts and set pieces that rank among the very best in cinematic history. The centerpiece stunt is undoubtedly among the riskiest ever attempted by Tom Cruise, which is certainly a remarkable claim given his extensive catalogue of death-defying stunts. Audiences genuinely feel the tension during that aerial sequence. Well, I did anyway. I think my jaw's still on the floor at the cinema. However, if Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning has proved anything, it's that the ability to do a death-defying stunt is insignificant next to the power of a good script. And that's the blunt truth of it.